In this third masterclass focused on Žižek's philosophy, we are going to be approaching the concept Eppur si muove, or and yet it moves. Eppur si muove is a central concept which appears in the introduction of Less Than Nothing. It refers to a fundamental motion. This is a motion of language, or a motion of the symbolic order. The logic of symbolism and its motion, in Žižek's interpretation, is unconscious, following in the Freudian tradition. The unconscious motion of the signifying chain is organized in Žižek's philosophy with the notion of the drive. The drive is not necessarily a psychical function or a conscious function. It is more a repetition automatism, the fact that the logic of signifiers is constantly moving and thinking and speaking independent of our ego or independent of our self-consciousness. The idea here, following again in the Freudian tradition, is that this motion of the signifying chain is mediated by a type of libidinal sexual energy. This sexual energy is, in its primordial form, a type of polymorphous perversity, but as the subject develops in a biological body, it becomes channeled eventually towards the concentration in the genital stage and can be further moved through processes of creative sublimation. When Žižek focuses on this fundamental motion as the central energy and motion of his philosophical attention, we get a different focus on the nature of truth. In the modern world, the notion of truth is often seen in a literalist interpretation. That means that when we're searching for the truth, we are looking for the literal truth of the external world, and our signifiers, our logical signifying functions, are meant to correlate with this external outside. Of course, in the postmodern tradition, oftentimes philosophers will try to deconstruct the literal truth of a scientific presupposition and instead try to historically contextualize these literal truths. However, Žižek's move, following in the Lacanian critique of historical interpretations and focusing on the truth of desire, the indeconstructible truth of desire, focuses instead on the importance of metaphorical truth. Metaphorical truth for Žižek is not the truth of a literal correlation with the world, but the truth of a whole, the truth of the way an image appears in the void of our creativity and fundamentally moves us. In other words, we're not focusing on the truth of the world, but focusing on the truth of the motion of historical subjectivity. In order to get this point across, Žižek relies on an analogy of the real, which is ultimately derived from the founding gesture of scientific materialism. In scientific materialism, one of the leading moments, or one of the crucial moments, is the understanding that planetary bodies move around other objects other than the Earth. Of course, Galileo understood this when he identified the moons of Jupiter orbiting around Jupiter and not the Earth. In a similar way, Žižek's main claim is this unconscious energy, this Eppur si muove, which continues to move, which is logical and rational but unconscious, is a type of center of gravity that we orbit around, which we are unaware that we orbit around. This could be seen as an analogy which is in some sense comparable to Freud's central claim that the discovery of the unconscious was a Copernican moment, a moment where our self-substantial ego, our center, is in some sense decentered in relationship to an unconscious. From this program, Žižek ultimately is trying to engage in a form of symbolic materialism, emphasizing the weight, the gravity, the density of the logical chain of repeating signifier motion, again, mediated by libidinal energy. All of this leads to a push towards not a historical deconstructionist view or horizon of philosophy, but instead a view that tries to understand the truth of our desire and thus the truth of our fictions, the truth of our social dramas, not as something that we can deconstruct, but as something that we can fully own, things that we can fully embody, and not things which can be reduced to, say, historical archetypes in a traditional sense, but that these fictions and dramas are radically open in relationship to the whole of our creative capacities. This opens up the space for real constructivism, not a radical constructivism where anything is possible, but a constructivism in relationship to the real, as a type of inner tension in relationship to our desire. In this way, Žižek tries to help us understand the way in which the whole of history is being mediated by a symbolic desire which is unconscious to our egos. This was an introduction to the concept of Eppur si muove, and yet it moves. Hopefully this is a useful video to help you interpret some of Žižek's denser texts. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.